In this episode of the Stamina Lab podcast, I spoke with Taylor Johnson. Taylor is a former NFL performance coach for the San Francisco 49ers, where he managed strength and conditioning, nutrition, and rehabilitation, while also overseeing their sports science initiatives to monitor and enhance athletic performance and recovery. Following his curiosity to develop elite cognitive performance, he then transitioned into the realm of esports, where he coached some of the world's best gamers on teams such as Optic Gaming and Evil Geniuses. In addition, he led teams pioneering software and research studies for cognitive athletes at AIM Labs, which I found super fascinating, especially the transfer of skills between the two realms of professional football and esports. Now, Taylor works with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and executives to give them a competitive advantage by adopting a holistic approach to their personal and professional lives. And I got to see how this worked in real time as Taylor coached me through one of the foundational exercises he does with his clients, which got me connected to my values and North Star at a deeper intrinsic level than I've felt in a long time. We also discussed the transformative concept of being a business athlete, a philosophy that intertwines optimal performance in business with the discipline and mindset of an athlete. This conversation is not just about strategies, it's about the stories we tell ourselves and how they forge our futures. I know you'll get a lot out of this conversation, so let's get started. Welcome to the newest episode of Stamina Lab, hosted by me, Glen Lubbert. If you're ready to upgrade your performance, achieve mental clarity, and improve your well-being, well, then you're in the right place. You'll hear the stories of professionals who have taken on big challenges while managing their energy and longevity through the ups and downs of pursuing their goals. Enjoy this episode, then head to the show notes to learn more so you can take the next steps to build the habits and systems you need to achieve your dreams. Welcome to the show, Taylor.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So I was really interested in when we had a pre-conversation about the concept of the business athlete.
Yeah.
Can you say what you mean by the business athlete? Tell us a little bit more about that, how you define that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of comes from my background in traditional sports. So working with traditional sport athletes and thinking about this athletic performance and how do you get somebody to perform at their best and really compete at the highest level. And then from that point in my career, then moving into gaming and esports, I work with these cognitive athletes who are doing the same thing, but more so from the cognitive output, not necessarily the physical output. Mm-hmm. And so now working with executives and CEOs and entrepreneurs, in my mind, they are playing a big game. They're playing at the highest level, and it's the game of business. And so for me, what I've always told people is I don't care about the game. I care more about the people playing the game. And so when I think about this business athlete, it's what can we take in best practices and move that into whatever arena they're stepping into and really help them show up and play at their best.
So whether it's the NFL or the esports or business, that's the game. It doesn't matter what the game. You're game agnostic.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most badass game we play is the game of life.
Yeah.
And so like the more you learn about yourself and understand the rules and make up your own rules, the more fun it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's really when you are in business, when you can have that mindset of this is a game.
Yes.
It makes life so much more fun.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk about that. You mentioned a little bit the transition. Working with in the NFL, yeah. and then going to esports.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit of that transition from different. There's different. It's obviously a different game, and you're not doing the physical piece. You're doing the mental piece in the esports.
Yeah. Yeah. So like that, how I got to esports.
How do you coach those different people,
okay.
or what's that transition differences?
Well, I think it's a lot of the same stuff. It's not that I don't think. I know it's a lot of the same stuff. And so for me, being in traditional sport, I mean, I've always said that my passion is performance, and it's my curiosity that navigates me through the world. And so really it's looking at like, what are the core components of what makes a performer the very best at what they do. And when I left the NFL, I mean, essentially, I'll just back up for a second. You can kind of distill those down into cultural, psychological, physiological, neurological, and tactical. And you can kind of break those out and fit whatever buckets you want within that. And so when I got into esports, there's a lot more similarities and differences. And so when I got into that space, I first came in with the, learner's mind and said, okay, well, what questions can I ask and how can I approach this with fresh eyes and start to uncover what does the actual infrastructure look like? What does the practice and preparation look like? What does competition look like? When I was asking these questions, it became very clear to me that it's very similar to traditional sports. And so kind of working backwards from game day, the same way you would in traditional sports, to say, okay, well, what variables need to be present in terms of volume, density, intensity, and frequency of practice and technical and tactical skills? And then how do you work backwards from game day to set them up for success? And so really it was a lot of the same stuff. It's just a different context.
And so were they, again, cultural?
So that came from my mentor, James Smith, who said, there's these 5 domains that are pretty consistent across all sport, all competitive endeavors, really. You have a cultural factor, you have a psychological factor, physiological factor, neurological factor, and a tactical factor. And then so you can kind of plug and play and say, okay, whatever industry you're in, what are these components that are present, and how does that transfer into you showing up and performing at your best?
And so in the esports arena, is there one that you emphasized more than in the NFL, or were they the same?
What do you mean by arena?
So in one of those different 5 areas, is there one that you emphasize more? So the psychological, maybe?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, they're all present. That's the thing. And they're all interconnected. So I think it really depended on the team that I was working with, the organization, and then the teams underneath the organization. And so really it was identify, like, what is the culture of that organization? What conversations are currently happening? Essentially, the epistemology, or what knowledge is present on how they think or feel an esport athlete should be trained. And oftentimes, this is true in traditional sport. It's like, hey, this is the way it's always been done.
Yeah.
Right. Which then the question needs to be asked, like, well, are we successful because of or in spite of everything we've done? And so from a cultural aspect, that was always the question to ask and say, okay, well, what is the culture we're setting up to create the psychology, the psychological safety to try new things, to then influence, okay, what are the decisions that we're making on a day-to-day basis? How are we setting up their training and recovery and things like that?
And then how does that translate into the business athlete?
Yeah, so it's essentially a lot of the same stuff, right? So and this is now that I've adapted that framework, and now lean more into like this performance modeling. And so this is the work from Dr. Andy Walsh, who's another one of my mentors. So he's a co-founder and partner at Liminal Collective, which I'm a partner of as well.
What is it?
Liminal Collective.
Liminal Collective, yeah.
And so essentially what Andy did over the years is he started to understand that there are different components, these critical success factors that need to be present in order to put a person or a team or organization in a position to be successful. And every person, team, and organization will have different success factors. So the modeling became, okay, you put the person or the organization in the center, and you run these design sprints to say, okay, what needs to be true for this organization, person, team to be successful? And so what that can look like is you have characteristics. So psychological traits, characteristics. You can have skills, so psychological skills. You can have health, nutrition, recovery, regeneration, exercise, and different things like this, right? So for the business athlete, it's the same thing. So you can put that person in the middle and say, okay, what needs to be true in order for you to be successful? So one, you have to know your business, right? So there's like the knowledge of the business itself. Then you have like tactical decision making. So your negotiation skills, your communication skills, conflict resolution, things like this. And so you can take an individual through that exercise and say, okay, what are these, we'll call it 5 to 10 different cogs in this wheel, in this performance model that need to be present. Where are you doing really well at? Where are you lacking? And that kind of gives us an idea of where do we need to start to level up some of these different areas.
Now, if you're working with someone individually, then but the organizational component, the culture in that case is not maybe aligned.
Sure.
You can only control so much.
Yeah.
In some situations. Yeah. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much said it. We focus on what we can control.
Yeah.
So for the executives that I work with that are in an organization, maybe there's a little bit of a cultural riff. It's like, okay, what are the things that we can focus on? And by we, it's like this individual who's an executive, whether it's VP or C-suite in this organization, what are the things they need to focus on in order for them to be the best at what they do? And sometimes what that ends up happening is they realize it's just not a good fit and they go somewhere else, which is cool too, right? Because at the end of the day, again, I don't care about the game they play. I care about the person playing that game.
Right.
So whatever it is they choose to do, I support it.
So one of my friend and colleague, Melissa Daimler, she wrote a book about culture, reculturing. I think it was actually the name of the book, but she talks about having a personal culture. Is that similar to what, I mean, where you have defined these things for yourself?
Sure.
Is that similar to what you're trying to create?
Another word for that is like ethos.
Ethos.
Yeah. So it's like, what are the characteristics? What's your day, like your life philosophy? I think part of what I think is really powerful in all high performance individuals, if you look at the people that are really great at what they do, they have a deep sense of self-awareness. Like they understand how to turn themselves on, how to downregulate, just their spatial awareness and how they navigate the room, how they navigate conversations. And so if you look at that and say, okay, well, why is that? It's because they just understand themselves on a deep level. So if you can build out your own operating system, or your user manual. It's like you buy a camera and it comes with a, user manual.
Right.
Like instructions on how to use it. Well, when we're born, we don't have that. And so I think it's really important to pause and make the time to say, okay, well, how am I operating? What are my values? Because values drive beliefs and beliefs drive behaviors, which is really important. Like values can be our deepest level programming.
Yeah.
And so when you become aware of that and say, okay, well, what's working for me and what's not? You can start to build out your own operating system and say, okay, well, what are the things I want to tweak and update? And for the engineers out there, people who have been in entrepreneur space and tech startup, you can refactor your code. Okay, so you can go in and take the spaghetti code that you might have slapped together, refactor it, which is essentially just rewriting bits of code and updating your operating system.
So no matter what level that they come and a client engages with you, you're going back and looking at starting with that.
Always. Yeah, I will always take people through a couple of like prereqs before we actually start working. One, just to make sure it's a good fit, and two, it's like to really get a sense of, are they going to do the work? Because I like to pick winners.
Right.
What I mean by that is like you got to be coachable.
Right.
Like I'm sure people that you work with too. I mean, even like people that we surround ourselves with, it's like you want to be at your edge. You be around other people that are at their edge too.
Right.
I'm a firm believer you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. So my clients, like I spend a lot of time with my clients. So I want the same thing.
Right.
So what I'll take them through is it's based off Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. And what we do, we pick a certain area of life. More times than not, it's career. And sometimes it's relationships, sometimes it's health, but it's always they come to me in the area of career first. And sometimes I'm like, actually, man, we got to work on your relationship first to be able to unlock.
That's draining you.
Yeah, to unlock what's possible in career. But more times than not, we start in career. And essentially what we do, if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell, Hero's Journey, it's like, you got this character, they have this call to action, and they cross the threshold and they go into the unknown. They go on this crazy journey and get the lessons, the trials and tribulations. They come back to the real world. They come back and they offer their gifts. And so what I do is I take them through this process in the area of career and say, okay, well, let's pick a couple of evolutions that you've gone through and really look at how do you do transformation? What are the themes? What are the patterns? What are the beliefs? And let's start to get a story in place of like, how do you in these situations? And then we can go back and say, okay, this is working and that's not. Like, what are the central themes? And then that kind of sets up for, well, what might be some negative emotions or limiting beliefs that are holding you back from crossing the next threshold? Because typically people that I work with, at least this phase of my career, are in some sort of liminal space. They've reached a certain level of success or they're looking to do something else. And there's just something that's just not clicking and holding them back. And they realize they have enough self-awareness to say, okay, well, if I'm going to cross this threshold, I'm going to need to level up.
Right.
And so together we do that deep dive, knock out whatever's holding them back, recreate their value structure. And like you said, like their personal culture, their ethos, Then on the back end of that, build out this performance program to make sure they can get it done.
So even if they likely had a personal ethos of some sort to get them where they were, but that, as you said, like in code, they need to be rewritten, upgraded for the next part of the journey.
Totally.
And then you said, whether they come at you for business or health or relationships, we always say, with my team, is it's different paths to the same stream. Yes. At some point, we're still going to do the same work.
Yes.
But it's just which area are you walking down to?
Yes. I mean, life will present you people and circumstances repeatedly until you learn a lesson.
Yeah.
And it'll come at you in different shapes and forms. It's all just cycling around. You're like, oh wow, that's different. Actually, it feels very similar, but it's different. Now it's in a relationship, but it wasn't career. So it's going to come back one way or another.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
The values work is like you said, it's foundational. Yes. And lots of times people struggle with, if you say, come up with your values, it's a struggle to do that. And we have some certain processes, but I'm curious, how do you tackle getting someone values? Because when you give them a list of values, I want to be all those things.
Yeah, I love it. So this is I spend a lot of time thinking and working with people on values. So do you want to take you through this?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So one of the things you said, which I think is the first mistake, is you give them a list of values. Mm-hmm. So you're already programming them to look at this list and say, I need to pick something off of this list. And so if you and I were having this conversation and I would say, Glenn, what's important to you in the area of career?
Yeah. I would say working with great people, doing work that's meaningful, has an impact. Yeah.
Okay. So meaningful, great people, impact. I would write this list down, and you see how you kind of stalled out?
Yeah.
I would redirect you to some random question, what'd you have for breakfast this morning?
Right. Okay. I have my health shake that I make.
Okay, cool. So what else is important about the area of career?
It supports my healthy lifestyle. Cool. Yeah.
So supports lifestyle.
Yeah. That I have time for other endeavors that charge me up.
Awesome. So what's a word for that?
I guess some balance, I guess.
Cool. So balance.
Yeah.
Okay. So you see how you already got more of a list and I just redirect you. So I'll do that three or four times. So I'm trying to get this dump of values, these words in your own words. It's not something I gave you.
It's not like this value term.
Yeah.
It's something that resonates with me more.
Exactly. Because each one of those words, we call them in neurolinguistics program, we call it submodalities. So each one of those words have submodalities. There's a visual, an auditory, a kinesthetic sense to it. So when you get deep on values work, each one of those words has a submodality associated with it. Mm-hmm. So we'll go through, we get a whole list. And then another way to think about this too, if you want to get more values, is can you think of a specific time in your career where you were totally motivated?
Yeah.
Okay, or a specific time.
Specific time when I was totally motivated, yes.
Great. As you think of that specific time, what was the feeling you felt right before you were motivated?
Right before excitement.
Excitement? Would you consider that a value in the area of career?
Sure, yeah.
Cool. Something like that?
Yeah.
Cool. So you'd write that down too.
Yeah.
So you're basically getting this list that came from you, and then you go back and say, okay, let's stack rank it. In the order of importance, what are your values? Mm-hmm. And then you can check that and say, okay, well, this top value, let's say we'll use excitement, recency. So excitement, is that more important than impact? Mm-hmm. No, actually impact's more important than excitement. Great, so you move that up.
Got it.
So we take a lot of time and we're shifting and moving values, and we take your top 5 and we elicit those submodalities. Say, okay, now tell me, as you think of this word, this impact, what do you see, what do you hear, what do you feel? We make it real, make it brighter, make it more powerful, make it more impactful, and we anchor to that. Then those become your top 5 values.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and then from that, because if values drive your beliefs and your beliefs drive your behaviors, then we check, okay, what beliefs do you have about your area of career based on these values?
In beliefs, by beliefs you mean what stories you're telling yourself?
Sure.
Yeah.
Positive and negative.
Yeah.
Right, we're checking because your behaviors will reflect what your values are. And that's where the coaching really comes in. That's the fun stuff, man. Because we build out these performance, again, from entrepreneur land, sprint cycles,
yep.
Agile sprints.
Yep.
I basically set up sprints And we're constantly checking. We're doing retros. We're thinking like, hey, what's working, what's not.
One of the other areas often to do with the values is what is not the antithesis. Or what bothers you
Sure.
as a clue to what is your value.
Great question to ask on that. I'm glad to bring that up. So you can say like, is there anything that's not on this list that could make you leave your current position? And they're like, oh yeah, like toxic. All right, well, what's the opposite of toxic? And then I give welcoming. Okay, great. Is that one of your values? Like, yeah, totally. So there's so many different ways to like lateral chunk around these words to come up with a complete list.
And then the other one idea we explore too is like, okay, you have that list, and maybe the list is 25 or 30, whatever the thing is, and then to try to get that stack ranking, and that also is a challenge, is to get that ranking. Like, okay, now I've got this. I'm like, I want to be all these. I want to be all these, which you are, but you have to for the operating system of decision making.
Yes.
You want to get it to a smaller list, and keeping that list every day and saying, which one of these values did you feel like you connected with today? And so over a month period or 3 weeks or even a week, those start to highlight, I'm doing this one every day. This is definitely, I'm putting this at the top of the list. With this one, I'm hitting this every 4 or 5 days, or not even at all. Yeah. I intellectually thought this was important to me, but
yes. I mean, I could send them to you, and if you want to put them in the show notes, there's 13 questions. So Dr. John DeMartini came up, he has this book called The Values Factor, which is awesome. There's 13 questions in that book where you can really do kind of like a gut check. And I call it a gut check because you may think you value certain things, but you answer these questions and you really figure out where are you spending your time, your energy, and attention. You're like, oh, I'm not... Like let's just say my value is freedom, and like I'm looking at where I'm spending my time, my energy, and attention, and it's not free.
None of that.
Whoa, it's a gut check because you're like, okay, wow. So what do I want to do about that? And then to your point, I love that you brought up the checking your behaviors, right? Like, where am I spending my time? A big thing that we do with values is we then say, okay, we write out these little mission statements or these life philosophy statements on how are your values going to be integrated physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Because that informs how you're showing up each day in each one of those areas. And that's a great place to check too.
Yeah.
So you can always go back and say, okay, like physically, these are my top 5 values. Am I embodying that in what I'm doing?
And these missions that you're writing, and even the values too, they change over a lifetime.
Yes.
So,
well, I mean, Glenn, let's just ask this question: do you value the same things in the area of career in your teens that you did in your 20s and your 30s?
Yeah, no.
Of course not.
Yeah.
So like values do change. Like I think about this all the time. Like my partner Hannah and I, we want to have kids.
Yeah.
And so when we have kids, my life values 100% are going to change.
Right.
Career values will change. Relationship values will change. And that's totally cool. It's just having the awareness and the appreciation, like, yes, it'll change, and having a little bit more say in how those change, if that makes sense.
Yeah, rather than just it happening to you.
Yes.
You only have control over so much, but being able to have at least some sense of having your hand on the steering wheel a bit.
Yeah, totally.
And so it's usually people in transition that you're going to be coaching. Would you say?
It's like lately that's been the case.
Yeah.
Not sure why.
Well, because they need a new operating system upgrade.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Yeah.
I think, and partly maybe because I've been through so many transitions in my career, I can really empathize with them.
Yeah.
I totally get it. Now, I won't fully understand because I'm not walking in their shoes, but I can appreciate what they're going through. And yeah, going in and refactoring your values. And what's crazy too is like when I take people through a breakthrough session, which is mental emotional release, and that's again, part of the front end of my coaching. And now it's becoming, I won't work with you unless you do that. Because as my mentor in NLP will say, I want to coach you, not your baggage. And so when you get rid of your baggage associated in a certain area of life, then you're actually getting this clean set of like your values and like what that person's really all about. then you're giving them a solid chance to actually take action on what they say they want to do.
So give me a little bit of sense of what that is.
Yeah. So I became a master practitioner in NLP about 2.5 years ago.
That's the neurolinguistic program.
Yeah. And so there's a process in that called MER, which is mental emotional release. And essentially what you're doing is you're just guiding an individual back in time on their timeline, and you're helping them get complete around 5 major emotions. So fear, anger, sadness, guilt, and shame in a specific area. And essentially what you do is you are just talking them through this process, and subconsciously they're going back and they're getting the lesson from a specific moment in time where they may have created a limiting belief or a perspective shift that alters how they now view themselves. And it's powerful, man. Like I've had 3 myself, and so like I practice what I preach. It's like I've had 2 in career, which have been amazing, and 1 in a relationship. And the 1 in a relationship, thank God I did it, because now I have the partner that I'm going to marry. You know, it's like my entire world orientation changed because of that break.
How long do those sessions last?
So it can be, I could do them in a day. It's a long day though.
Yeah.
Typically what I do is I break them up into 2 sessions. So it's 2 back-to-back 4-hour sessions, and then there's 2 or 3 calls that follow that. It's like in 1 week succession.
And these, you're not working with everybody in person.
No, this is remote. Yeah. Most of these sessions that I do are remote.
So I want to backtrack a little bit more back to the values process. How, if you're just doing in maintenance mode for yourself, maybe you don't need the full coach, but something you want to do. How often do you recommend reviewing these values and going through at least your own process a little bit?
My question for you is, how often do you review your business plan?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it means that there's an annual review, and then there's a quarterly review, because your annual plan only lasts probably 2 or 3 months.
Exactly. It's like, I would say the same.
Yeah.
And everybody's different, you know? So like, I like to say, you know, you set your strategy for the year.
Yeah.
And then quarterly, you're reviewing your tactics.
Yep.
Monthly, you're basically saying like, well, how am I doing as I'm moving towards those tactics? And you're sprinting weekly, and you're basically doing effort daily.
Yeah.
And so it's a constant checking in and constant awareness.
Yeah, and I think that maybe there's different levels. I mean, the big work, perhaps that's only it's an annual piece, like it's a strategy piece that you do for yourself. And the way I do it, and the way we work with our clients, is that the annual review can be done where you're doing more of the looking back and planning, but then doing this values work or the integrity of yourself and where you think that I always recommend to do that. It's like a mid-year thing. So it's a different, you're in a different headspace.
Totally.
And there's different times of the year, and try to make that as the ongoing maintenance of the puzzle that you do. And I find the longer you do it, the more interesting it gets, because then you start, what's still hanging on here?
Oh man, that's why I'm a huge proponent of journaling. Yeah. I mean, I've journaled consistently for the last 9 years.
What are you journaling?
So it's changed.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy, because like I'll go back and I have like the binders, paper binders, and then I transferred over to like my iPad in OneNote, which thank God, because like it was just, I still keep all my totals, which is kind of crazy. I did have one moment where I was like, all right, I got what I needed out of these. I want to like just like burn them or whatever. I can't do it.
No,
because there's still so much gold. Like unless I scan them, maybe I upload them one day.
Yeah.
So what am I journaling? It really depends. I mean, I think what I started out doing was just gratitude.
Yeah.
It's like, let me just write 3 points of gratitude. And then I remember going through different waves of like getting very like structured with like different prompts and questions I was asking myself. And I just didn't really latch onto that. I think because for as much as I love structure and routine, that practice, like writing for me and having that much structure, just felt too constraining.
Yeah.
So then I'd have times where it was just free writing. And I would do like, please forgive me, I'm forgetting the name of the book, The War of Art. It's like the workbook.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on the author's name. But there's a workbook and a great book. And basically there's, free writing for like 3 pages. And so I did that for a while. And that was really cool. That's like a direct tap to your subconscious. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then after a while, I was like,
just whatever comes up.
Yeah, and you don't stop. You just keep writing, keep writing. And now what it looks like is, if you remember the Best Self Journal?
Yeah.
Okay, so I took components of the Best Self Journal, like a little bit of that framework, plus some free writing, and I just kind of made my own.
Right.
So then I'll do like my weekly, and then I'll go back and do a weekly debrief, and then I have quarterly segments for that.
Yeah, I always find it interesting how people journal. There's no right or wrong way to journal.
No.
So lots of times people pick up one of these systems to start off with, but over time, then you say, okay, this kind of works for me. This kind of doesn't work for me, and you start to.
I'll say the bare minimum for me is every morning 3 points of gratitude. I write a declaration of how I want my day to go.
Yeah.
More so like how am I showing up, and this kind of incorporates my values and like a way of being. I can always call out 3 things. Like this morning I want to be grounded, present, and engaged. Right. So it's kind of like, and then at the end of the day, I go back and check, like, was I grounded, present, and engaged? And if not, why? Because again, that's part of that awareness. And then I write 3 points of gratitude at night. 1 or 2 lessons that I learned from the day, 1 or 2 wins, and anything I need to think about for the next day, and I'm done.
Yeah, the gratitude is a fantastic way to start, and it's one I'd always do, and it really helps not just with journaling, getting what's on your mind, but also it has physiological help. It helps me sleep, because I'm like, all right, whatever stress I had of the day, framing it back through this lens, when you're going to sleep, you're getting tapped into your subconscious. So it's that liminal state there where you're moving from the prefrontal cortex to the default mode network. And so by framing it that way, it allows for, I think, sounder sleep.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I have notoriously not been the best sleeper. And so I will make time to journal and read before bed as part of my nighttime routine. Mm-hmm. And what I found similar to you, it's like, if I just do a brain dump at night, oh man, it's like, okay, it's on the paper. I'll come back to it tomorrow. Like, I don't have to think about it anymore. For a lot of that, especially for the gamers, that was a really big thing. It was actually a couple of components. 1, way too much caffeine. But 2, it's like they were perseverating on these thoughts of what happened over the day. So teaching them how to do a formal after action review or a debrief, and then do a brain dump or journal at night was really helpful for them. And same thing with a lot of executives. It's like they're nonstop. Entrepreneurship is hard.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
It's so hard. And so just giving yourself that chance to dump whatever's on your mind gives you a little bit of reprieve to then kind of train your awareness to be like, okay, it's there. I don't need to think about it.
The esports, I guess this applies to anything. One of the things I always say about performance is the performer is commonality is deliberate practice. You're coming at something and you're doing deliberate, consistent, you're assessing your work and doing it over and over again. And I think with the esports too, I would think too that their subconscious, when they're sleeping, has to do a lot of work, because they have to memorize everything that they just did, all those places that they're going in. I guess like I said, learning routes and routes for NFL and
well, they do a film review as well. They have data analysts and film review, and there's a lot.
For the esports, they have
full-blown teams.
Interesting.
Full-blown data science teams.
There was a movie I watched recently, Gran Turismo. It's a story of an esports athlete that they had a wild idea to see if they could actually race a car.
Oh, interesting.
And
cool.
It's based on a true story. They got him into the training program, and he has a mildly successful racing career. And I thought that was really interesting, because it speaks to that transferable skills. What are the same things, no matter what the game is, that you could apply to apply to the other.
I want to bring it back to the one point you made of the deliberate practice, like the quality, the quantity, and the frequency of good practice. You can't overlook that. And that goes for anything, Anything and everything in life. It's like, if you want to get better at a specific skill, the quality, the quantity, the frequency matter.
Yeah. And then I think that that's why I believe that if you had some athletic background, with as long as, if it's a team or even an individual sport, that deliberate practice knowledge, even if it was in high school, when you get into business, to be really effective and be successful, applying that same muscle memory, for fun, to business is really often successful.
Yep.
Yeah. But you talk about business athlete, lots of times because of this, that entrepreneurs and business leaders are often like weekend athletes, and so I didn't know. Do you see that in your?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's important to acknowledge and even consider pretty thoroughly is, again, in traditional sports, we do a really good job of working backwards from game day. So understanding the different loads and, essentially trying to prevent overtraining and burnout. And for the modern day business athlete who is hyper competitive and wants to excel and wants to win and is building out this multidisciplinary approach and understanding themselves and how they show up and performing at a high level, it is also important to work backwards from your quote unquote game days and not have multiple game days in the same day, or understand how to balance your schedule as much as you can to give yourself the rest and recovery to then show up physically and cognitively. And I think that's what's really interesting, is thinking about like working with a couple of individuals and looking at their schedule and be like, do you control your schedule? Like, yes. I'm like, do you really? They're like, kind of. I'm like, okay, with as much as you can, let's start to think strategically. If you got a board meeting on a Thursday, let's give you a little bit of space on a Wednesday to make sure that you don't blow yourself out and then you go into that board meeting and not show up the way you know to. It's just being a little bit strategic, and that goes a long way. Yeah,
that's so interesting. Yeah, no, the controlling your calendar, or even just having a calendar.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And just not going from thing to thing.
And not leaving any white space.
Yeah.
I think so that's Dr. Eric Potterat in his new book talks about this too, which is a phenomenal book. Please forgive me, I'm blanking on the title, but that's coming out soon. Dr. Eric Potterat. He was on a podcast and he was talking about, what the best performers do, especially in business, is they don't leave white space in their calendar. Meaning, like, they don't give themselves the opportunity to do anything that's not in alignment with what they want to achieve. They're able to get a lot done in a short amount of time. And so taking control of your calendar and time blocking and being intentional about your time blocking and being specific, like, here's what I need to do in this time. I mean, you're just setting yourself up for success, because then your attentional focus goes right to that.
Right.
And you're limiting any distractions.
And time blocking off time for recovery too as well. So it's not like you do need space on your calendar, but it's intentional space.
Like the space in your calendar is blocked and it says recovery.
Yes, exactly. Or go for a walk.
I mean, I do that every day. It's like lunch and a walk.
Yeah.
And then, after this, 5 p.m.'s for me now, it's like I go sauna, cold plunge.
Nice.
I do that every day.
Nice. And those are like, you have those on your calendar, like these are, from now to eternity. I have that the walk time on here, but those they can be moved around on the day.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up another point. It's like when Dr. Eric Potterat talks about this on his podcast and his book, it's you can color code them.
Yeah.
So like
yellow is my wellness recovery. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know, so me too. So like for me, it's like my color, it looks like a freaking Skittles. Right? It's like, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
He makes it pretty simple, and he says, red is non-negotiable; it will not move. Yellow is like, I'll move it, but I need to have a good reason. Green is like, it's flexible, it can move. And so even making it like red, yellow, green makes it like, it'll just tell your mind like, hey, that is there and that's not moving if it's red. So that can be helpful too.
You said before about, when we have our values and we have our beliefs, and you're doing your strategy and your tactics all the way down to our calendar, exactly what we're doing. So
Yep.
that's really getting really clear on focus.
Yes.
Time boxing also getting clear on focus. These are all tools around for getting into flow state. And that's when you're going to get the extra benefit of the neurochemicals in your brain to do excellent, outstanding work performance. And is that something that you investigate with your clients?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's all the process of self-awareness. So it's understanding like where throughout the day are they most productive on average? Like where do they tend to have a drop off in energy? If they do, let's be aware of it, and then even though I don't do a lot of like the health and wellness coaching, that is a part of it, right? So it's understanding like what foods are helping them get into a place where they feel sustained energy, like clean energy. Are they doing enough physical training on a consistent basis that gives them like that mental pop? Is it cardiovascular? Is it resistance training? So even though I'm not like in my former career of like doing all that type of programming, that is still part of our programming.
You're assessing it.
I'm assessing it, and more times than not, I end up writing something up for them.
Sure.
I could do that in my sleep.
Right.
Like I'm actually more interested in the big picture. It's like looking at everything and then drilling down and saying, okay, what are all the variables? It's kind of like architecting it. But yes, I mean, figuring out like how do they like what is their recipe? Like what a cool experiment to run, right?
Yeah.
It's like that's why we do 2-week sprints because we're constantly assessing and saying, okay, we're gonna focus on one variable at a time. And we'll do that in 2-week sprints, and we'll assess like how's that going. Because if you try to change everything all at once, you won't know what works. And that people tend to do that. Same thing when they go to the gym. It's like too much, too soon, too often. They blow themselves out, and then they don't go back to the gym for like a week, and it defeats the purpose.
Yeah. So the sprints, how do you structure those? Like if I really wanted to do one on my own, how would I go about it?
Cool. So like for what? For what area?
So say we're focusing on what's the most common when you would do for a business athlete?
Yeah, I mean a very easy one we could talk about is like the calendar.
Okay, yeah,
Calendar, right? So, typically what I'll do with clients is I'll work 3 weeks on, 1 week off. So kind of like load, and then give them a week off, and then we come back the following month. And like in that week off, we'll kind of assess, right? They're doing some assessment too. So if we're thinking about your calendar, it's like, all right, rather than trying to change all the calendar colors and start moving things around, like let's just change one thing. So for the next 3 weeks, let's say, okay, you're going to color coordinate red, yellow, green. Let's just try that and see how that goes. So that's an example of like a 3-week sprint. So like, how does that actually feel? Do you feel more productive when you do that? And we're having weekly calls so we can check in on that and make adjustments. And we would just take it slow like that. And another thing, if they're picking up quickly on it, like, actually, yep, this is great. I love it. All right, let's try one more thing. Maybe it's taking their 60-minute calls and making it 50. And a 30-minute call and making it 20. So they get or 25 minutes. They get a little bit of time back. And it's just constantly playing around with little variables.
That's interesting about the different time. They taking 5 minutes off. Does anybody report back they weren't able to get through everything they were able to get to in 30 minutes, in 25 minutes?
Well, I mean, actually what they say is like, thank God for that, because it gives them like a little bit of a bathroom break.
Yeah.
Or it's a forcing function to be like, hey, we need to be focused. So then it's like, okay, what's the intention of this meeting? What are the 3 things you want to take away from it? What are the 3 things I want to take away from it? How diligent can we be to stay on track? And again, a lot of we're getting very like tactical with like some of the coaching stuff, but really it's more of like, okay, how are you showing up physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? And are we driving in the right direction so that this achievable outcome that you set out for yourself at the beginning of our coaching, we're making progress towards that?
Yeah, I like that, and emphasizing it every morning, how you want to show up. I really like how you do that. I do that as well. I have a mental check-in for myself. Writing it down, obviously, you're going to get an extra boost of connection to it.
Totally.
Mostly, I just think through it before I get out of bed, but it definitely helps frame the day to say, okay, this is how I'm going to be approaching the day, and I it's just it's an easy thing to incorporate, but it has such a powerful impact for the whole day, I think.
Some of the best things are.
Yeah.
It's like super simple, massive impact.
Yeah. So you talked about, well, one of the things I wanted to ask about here is building resilience. That's more of a long-term piece, but we all come up against this storm, always come up against a storm at some point. And there's a metaphor from Scott Barry Kaufman who's talking about Maslow's hierarchy needs, and not really being a triangle, but reimagining it as a sailboat. And I really like that because you don't just hit self-actualization and then you're done.
Yeah.
I'm like, I made it. I win the game.
Yeah.
It's things are ebbing and flowing, just like you said. You were where you were at, and now you need to rewrite that code to go next level. There was a storm probably came through, and you don't want to leave your sail out. If the storm's coming through, it'll rip the sail apart. And you won't be able to sail anymore. You put the sail down, focus on your basic needs in the hull, and then when the sunshine comes back out, which it does, you can put the sail back up. So I really like that metaphor. But you have to be able to be aware. I guess resilience is a part of awareness. Would you say? Like, how do you go approach resilience with your clients?
Yeah, one thing I just want to come back to before we start on that is I love when you hit self-actualization, like you're not done. There's an ing, like you're self-actualizing. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah,
like you don't just want to be loved. You want to be loving. It's like an ongoing thing. So with resiliency, and I think about this a lot from physical training, where the whole intention behind, training is to increase your capacity, whether that's your work capacity, your durability, your resiliency, your strength. And I think all those things factor into just day-to-day life. And so, again, coming back to the awareness, it's the intentionality that you're putting into, well, how am I showing up and what do I want to get out of this? And the resiliency comes in where you're going to get kicked down. And it's going to come at you from a couple different directions. Probably you didn't even see it coming. And really it's about, what are you making that mean? What are the labels that you're putting on that? What are the lessons that you can learn? And I think one of the most powerful things you can do is choose to find the lesson in everything. And when you can get the lesson without the negative emotion or that emotional charge, that is true wisdom. Because contextually, if something were to arise in the future that is similar, you'll have that reference point without the negative charge that'll pull you back in a different direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like the awareness and the lesson and like truly getting that lesson to get the wisdom, because there's a difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom.
Right. And how does values connect to resilience?
Oh man, I think it's a huge driver in just how you're showing up. So again, part of your resiliency is, are you staying true in integrity with your values?
When the storm comes.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And it's okay to falter. I think that's the other thing too. We gotta give ourselves some grace.
Yeah.
We're humans, man. We're on this rock and floating through space, figuring it out. No one's got to figure it out,
right,
which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
When you get that, you're like, oh yeah, it's kind of fun.
Everyone's making it up.
Everyone's making it up.
Yeah.
So, and I think that the important part about that is, how do you want to make it up?
Yeah.
Not based on programming or influences by anyone else. It's like, how do you choose to live your life? Again, coming back to what I said earlier, the most badass game you ever play is a game of life. It's like, how do you want to play? How cool is that?
If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's in that space where they're wanting to upgrade their operating system, what would that be? How would you recommend they get started?
Yeah, great question. Start with awareness. Just start becoming mindful of thoughts and interpretations, because that is the first track of okay, am I even aware of me interpreting this information? And then the second piece is then take action. Ask yourself the question, is this interpretation useful? Is this helping me in this moment? If not, choose something different. We have the power to do that. And so it's just having the awareness and the practice to do that, which is not easy. And with repetition, just like anything else, deliberate practice, the quality, quantity, and frequency of consciously choosing, yes, is this for me? Is this in alignment? Is this in my benefit? Yes or no? And making that choice. Because awareness, mindfulness, is only 50% of the equation. You have to take action.
That's a fantastic place to wrap up. Taylor, if there's someone wanting to get in touch with you, how would you recommend they contact you?
Yeah. So TaylorJohnsonPerformance.com. is my website, and then LinkedIn is where I post all my content. So you can look up Taylor Johnson Performance there. And I appreciate you having me on, man.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to be on the show.
Of course.
And thank you everyone for listening. Until next time, be well. Hey, thanks for tuning into the show. Any information about this week's guest can be found in the show notes, along with other resources for upgrading your own performance and enhancing your well-being. Lastly, if you want to join the Stamina Lab community, head on over to staminalab.io. Until next time, be well.